All right. Yeah, so thank you all so much for being here. We're super excited about the forum today. It's hosted by both Cheer and G, and we're going to add links to their websites to get more information if you're interested. We're also recording the forum, so I just wanted to let you all know that the forum is being recorded, and we're going to send it out as a copy later on. So you all will have a copy of the slides as well as all the discussions. So just a quick overview. Today we're going to look at recovery capital, which is a mix of internal and external resources that people can draw on to support their recovery. The concept of recovery capital is still pretty unfamiliar to a lot of researchers, and then even more so to people in the broader community. So we just wanted to explore what recovery capital is and how emerging adults may have like a specific needs for recovery capital. We're also really excited that we get to share some insights and lived experience from both emerging adults and a family member who supported an emerging adult in recovery. Ruth, just so you know, you're sharing like your screen and your video. Okay. So yeah, our hope is that by having emerging adults and family members share their lived experience, it's going to help us kind of spark ideas for future research and provide practical community-focused insights for providers and individuals in recovery. Ruth, I'm going to let you figure that out, but I'm going to keep going.
Can you see the slides?
Can everybody see the slides and Ruth, or is it just
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gigantic.
Yeah.
Oh my
okay?
gosh. Okay. I don't like that.
I mean, you're fantastic, so
You're great.
Don't know how to stop that. I think I'm just gonna stop sharing and then reshare.
okay.
Okay.
Thanks for holding, everybody.
Sorry. How about now?
I can still see you and
Oh
see
God.
that.
Maybe
Do you
this?
want?
Does
Oh,
that help?
yeah, that works. Yes.
Are you just seeing
Okay.
the slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for. Okay. So first, I'll introduce myself really quickly, but then we're going to go into a brief overview of what recovery capital is. So I'm just going to give you all kind of like, broad strokes of what recovery capital is. And then we're going to talk about what it looks like specifically for emerging adults and some things that we learned through our community boards at CHEARR and JEAP. And then the stars of the show, we're going to introduce our panelists and have them all talk a little bit about their experience with recovery capital, some things they wish they had known about it, some things that really helped, things like that. After that, we'll do a Q&A time, so kind of a facilitated discussion about emerging adult recovery capital. And finally, we'll do some closing announcements. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is me. I'm Dr. Lauren Lewis. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Tech University in the Community, Family, and Addiction Sciences Department. I also got my PhD here, so I'm an alumni of Texas Tech in Addictive Disorders and Recovery Studies. After my PhD, I completed a postdoc fellowship with CHEARR at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. And before that, I was a licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor in Colorado. So that's really where my background is and where my passion for this type of research came from. So my research focuses on how individuals really thrive in recovery, and I like to use community-based participatory research to make sure that their voices are being included in the research that we're doing. And a lot of the work I have done is driven by these concepts of like emerging adults and recovery capital. So I'm really excited to share some of these ideas with you. Okay, next slide. So what is recovery capital? So recovery capital is a combination of internal and external resources that an individual has. and it's going to help them both enter into recovery and sustain their recovery. So the concept was first introduced in the late 1990s, and since then it's really gained traction in the research community because it recognizes both the internal strengths and the impact of someone's environment on their recovery. The concept also really highlights the idea that recovery is not only about abstinence or a reduction in substance use, but it is about like this process or transformation that somebody goes through, both in their health and wellness, as well as their substance use. So recovery capital is really going to vary from person to person, and is going to change over time for each individual, which makes it really complex. It's going to be influenced by your age, your gender, your mental health, your substance use history, the amount of time you have in recovery, and a number of other factors. And I feel like all of us have seen how this impacts people just kind of anecdotally in the work that we do or through our lives, right? Some people have access to resources that other people just simply do not have. And that's affected by a really wide range of variables. So recovery capital can be divided into four components, which are sometimes called domains. And these are known as human capital, social capital, financial, which can sometimes be called physical capital, and then community capital. And I'm going to go into each of those here in a second. So each component of recovery capital is really just going to help individuals manage the challenges that come up as they build their life in recovery. And I really wanted to note that while we can kind of generally divide everything into these four domains, there are other conceptualizations of recovery capital. So some people have like a different name for the domain or maybe a different grouping. But we're going to go with these four because this is what we used in the board, in our community boards. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that not every type of capital might like neatly fit into a domain, but we're just going to do our best to kind of understand, right, that humans are complex and this is the best way we can understand it. So now I'm going to give a little overview of what each type of capital is. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so first we're going to start off with human capital. So human capital is going to include a real wide range of like intrinsic or inherited traits that are going to help an individual function in their day-to-day life. So example of this can include life skills like communicating with others, scheduling your day, setting boundaries, or advocating for yourself. It can then also include things like your job skills and your employability, and more psychological principles. So the motivations that you have, your coping skills, the amount of self-esteem you may have, or your emotional intelligence. So more of those kind of like internal psychological principles. Human capital also includes knowledge. So this is not only knowledge, about like your job field or something like that, but also knowledge about recovery or resources, how to kind of get through your day, what jobs are available. So knowledge on really just like a wide range of things. And then lastly, it's also going to include health and wellness. So this is going to include physical health, mental health, sexual wellness, kind of, again, broad range of health. So you really want to think of human capital as what an individual is going to bring from within themselves to build a thriving and fulfilling life in recovery. This is kind of that inner strength and resilience that someone might have. Liz, you can go to the next slide. So social capital is going to be the benefits someone gets from membership in different social groups. So this is going to mostly include social support, right? So the social support somebody might be getting from their friends and family, as well as support from mentors and peers, especially around their recovery. And it's also going to include access to opportunities that are going to help people in recovery. So for example, if someone is a part of a 12-step community, they may then gain access to like certain social events or have deeper connection to recovery supports offered because of that mutual aid 12-step that they're attending. Other examples of that are that it can potentially lead right to like a connection for a job or getting a car, things like that. So it's social support in a way that like it opens up opportunities that may have not been available before, and that it's going to help them resolve problems that may come up, right? So these relationships, connections, and bonds are really going to like have someone on your side that's going to encourage your recovery and encourage your well-being. Okay, Liz, we can go to next one. Okay, so financial capital, which, as I said before, is sometimes called physical capital. This is really more of that kind of tangible economic or financial asset that somebody might have. So, from a basic level, this is going to be right income, property, maybe you have a savings, any kind of like tangible money that you might have access to. But this is also going to include access to care that you need just for having like your basic needs met. So that's going to include having housing, having transportation. It can also include things like health insurance, or just having the ability to like pay your own bills. So we all know, right, the financial capital, like this is really going to vary from person to person, and it can have a really big impact on daily living as well as recovery and wellness. So financial capital, like I said, is more of those tangible things. Okay, Ruth. Okay, and then the last type of capital is community capital. So community capital is going to be more about the resources that are available to an individual in the community that they're a part of that are going to support their recovery. So how much does the environment kind of aid in their recovery? So this is going to include things like services to mental health or maybe recovery support services, and not only is that service available, but is it accessible, right? Is it nearby? Is it inviting? Is it run by people who have a similar background to you? Is it somewhere you feel safe going? So think questions like that. We also want to consider what programs might be available for school or work. So thinking of like recovery high schools or collegiate recovery programs, as well as recovery ready workplaces. Um, because we spend so much time at work and at school, it can be really important to be somewhere that is supportive of your recovery. And then there's also, like in Europe, I know there's starting this kind of idea of like recovery cities. So even cities that are being really thoughtful about having recovery spaces and events for people. So just thinking about how inclusive your community is of being in recovery. Okay, Chris, you can go on. So, like I said, that was really just a brief overview of recovery capital, right? Just kind of trying to give you an idea of what it is in general. And so I also wanted to talk about why it would be important to understand recovery capital for emerging adults specifically. So emerging adults have a huge number of major life transitions, right? So these are people aged 18 to 29, roughly. Um, and this is really a time of gaining independence, of defining who you are, of changes to your relationships, both in family and friends and like romantic relationships, and a time of like new possibilities, tons of new possibilities. There's also a time of a lot of societal pressure on this age group. So there's a lot of expectations of maybe gaining an education or attending college, starting a career, or finding like a real meaningful place of employment. The responsibilities in your family could really be shifting. The responsibilities to your household, to your friends. It's also a time where you're really expected to start gaining financial independence. And like I said, there's kind of a societal expectation about like romantic relationships and things like that. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of transitions happening in this time. And then if we're thinking about emerging adults who are in recovery, it's all of these processes happening. And then on top of that, they're also navigating recovery and what resources may or may not be available to them. Another thing that's just kind of important to keep in mind, which I'm sure a lot of you have already known, But research has also shown that emerging adults have higher rates of suicidality. So one stat is that about 500,000 emerging adults have attempted suicide in the past year. It's like a really alarming rate. And they have a higher risk of substance use disorder. So in that kind of we get yearly statistics about substance use from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And that showed that about 26% of emerging adults were meeting criteria for a substance use disorder, right? So had a substance use disorder. But adolescents were at 8% and older adults were at 16%. So 26% of emerging adults is pretty high, pretty alarming. And then on top of that, unfortunately, our data has shown that only about 4% have access to treatment. So all of this is just saying that we really need to be thoughtful and that it's important to really tailor our research and our clinical treatment and support services to the really unique needs of this group of people. And it's a really vulnerable population that really needs to be researched more. I also see that Kristen just popped in there that we're doing a special edition journal on emerging adults. So if you're doing research on that, let us know. So some things that we did as a team through CHEARR and JEAP is we worked with our community boards to introduce this idea of recovery capital, very similar to the introduction I just gave you all. And then we collaborated with them for months and months to talk about what recovery capital meant for them. So we brainstormed, like in each of these categories, what are things that are important to you? What are things that you wish you had more of or that you know really helped you? And we used that to help inform and develop a new measure of recovery capital that's specific for emerging adults, which is now in the testing phase. Really exciting. So I wanted to share some of the ideas that these community boards provided for us. So these were either emerging adults who are in recovery or peer support providers who work with emerging adults, the people who are really getting their hands dirty with emerging adult recovery. So what we learned from them for human capital is that the importance of having daily structure kind of kept coming up. So having something to do every day and making sure that you have a plan for every day. What are you going to do with your time? What are some kind of meaningful activities that you can schedule your day around? That was really important. Keep them busy and productive. They also discussed the importance of all aspects of health, which I had mentioned before. So not only your physical health, but also your mental health, emotional health, and your sexual wellness as well. They talked about the importance of having aspirations and goals. So short-term and long-term goals were really important coming up, and improving daily life skills. They also talked about self-esteem and the importance that played in their recovery, and then developing and finding their identity. So kind of figuring out what parts of their identity were most important to them and how to honor that moving forward in their recovery. For social capital, some things that they shared were that having peers in recovery, so other emerging adults who were also in recovery, was really important. And then on top of that, they talked about how important having a mentor was as well. So someone who's maybe a little bit older and has been in recovery a little bit longer that can help them get through these life changes. They talked about defining and setting boundaries, as well as connecting with family, which was both chosen family and biological family. And then they also talked about connecting to recovery-related apps and social media. So for example, following other people in recovery on TikTok, or maybe watching YouTube videos, or having an app that helps you track your sobriety. So things like that. For financial capital, it really included having recovery supportive housing. So again, not only having somewhere to live, but having somewhere to live that really supports their recovery. They also talked about gaining financial independence by being able to pay their own bills, and hopefully being able to have a little bit of money left over to do some things for themselves. This also included having insurance and then having access to reliable transportation. And finally, some things we learned about community capital was really about not only having access to resources in the community, but finding providers and support services that were non-judgmental and friendly and open to support them. Other types of community capital included collegiate recovery communities for the individuals who were in college, having access to legal resources, and having local recovery support services. Okay. Okay. So now this is really the heart of it, right? This is why we all came. This is why we're all so excited to be here. I'm really happy to be able to introduce our three incredible panelists for the day, and just so honored to be able to hear their stories and learn from their perspectives and their lived experience. So they're going to talk to us about recovery capital and how it impacted their journey through recovery, as well as maybe some things they wish they had known. And then, like I said, after the panelist talk, we will also have lots of time for questions and answers. So today we're going to hear from Sandy Valentine. She previously led a CRP at the University of Connecticut and was the executive director of Rhode Island's Recovery Community Organization. She's also the co-founder of Valentine Recovery Consulting, and she's going to share her experience as a family member of an emerging adult in recovery. We're also going to hear from two emerging adult community board members. So Eleanor Bird and Jolie Fader. They're both peer recovery support specialists, and they're both board members, one with CHEARR and one with JEAP. So to start us off, we're going to have Jolie Fader. She's, like I said, a peer recovery specialist, and she's a member of the CHEARR Young Adult Community Board. So welcome, Jolie, and thanks so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just want to make sure I have 11 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure so I don't talk too much or too little. But hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jolie Fader. I'm a young adult regional peer recovery specialist with Massachusetts Young People in Recovery, and I am in the Western Mass region. So we're a nonprofit that provides peer support for young adults throughout the whole state of Mass. So we get to do a lot of fun things, groups, outings, recovery coaching, and really any other kind of peer support that a young adult may need. And I'm in recovery as well. So I figured I would just give like a few minutes overview of my journey and then talk about kind of like what I wish I had known about recovery capital and what I wish family members had known and how community support played a role in my recovery. So like I said, I am in recovery. I'm 25 years old. I just turned 25 in January. Oh my gosh, my frontal lobe is developed, apparently. But I started using substances as a teenager. I was a child of a single parent. And my sister had significant disabilities, and I was a caretaker. So really looking back, I'm able to see that there was a lot of recovery capital missing there. I wasn't able to like go anywhere because I would have to be home with my sister. So I couldn't like join clubs or do fun things with friends, or even get a job really until she got placed in a like a home, like a children's nursing home a few years later. So it was very difficult, and I had access to substances at my house, and I used them a lot throughout my teens. It kind of got a bit better by my senior year because I was able to drive, and I was very studious. So even in between the substance use, so I was in charge of a lot of clubs. I was doing a lot of service, lots of fun stuff. And I went off to college, and I was a freshman in college when the COVID lockdown happened. So we all got sent home, and that just began like a very difficult time for my life, as well as I hear from a lot of peers similarly. So again, I was kind of stuck at home. I wasn't doing well in school. I was struggling really badly with my mental health. And that kind of revved up the substance use, which kind of turned from chaotic use into like dependence, like full-blown drug dependence. So I eventually, after a couple of years, I went to treatment and I was in treatment for a little bit. Actually ended up moving to Florida and went to like a sober living down there and was there for a little bit and then decided to move back up. So I am back in Massachusetts and I work in the field now. After a few months after I got back, I applied for this job and I guess they like me because they hired me. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. Um, so I have some notes here, so I'm just going to refer to them. But in terms of what I had wished I had known about recovery capital early in my recovery, um, there's a lot of things. I think the first thing that stands out to me is that there are more communities other than 12-step communities. I went to a treatment center that was based in 12-step programming, and other options for treatment or more so like recovery support were not even presented to me as an option. So when I realized, when I actually did some research, mostly because of my new role at the time, and I learned that like there's smart recovery, there's recovery dharma, there's all recovery. Even the Satanic Temple has a recovery program, right? So like there's a lot more out there than 12 step. And I don't really have anything bad to say about 12 step. I think it was just that it was the only option presented to me. So if I felt like I had an issue with it, I felt like, oh, like I guess I'm like anti-recovery, or I guess I can't do this. When in reality, I didn't realize until later on that was just simply not the case. There's so many other options out there. So I really wish I had known that earlier in my recovery too, because I think I would have felt more supported, and had more options. Um, I think for physical resources, physical recovery capital, like definitely, at least as a teenager, like what led me to using substances was a lack of transportation and a lack of kind of infrastructure to support students who, had to be home for various reasons. Um, and so that's something I wonder about too. Not that I could have driven underage, but like, had there been another bus running at a certain point, or had there been some sort of club that you could do online and in person? I'm not exactly sure. That was 10 years ago. I don't really think we were using Zoom a lot back then, but now I think a lot of us are used to Zoom. Um, and I think too, there's still a lot of stigma in terms of like housing, recovery housing. And what I mean by that is like, I have been to certain sober homes where, and I understand why they do this to protect the safety of people in the house, but like if you um fail the drug test, like you're out, like you got to go. And I think that kind of leads to stigma and this idea that like certain people deserve housing more than other people. Um, so that was, I have no answer for this, by the way. I'm looking to you guys as people who can help fix this problem. But I'm kind of, it's just kind of this idea that I feel still exists, that housing is like a privilege when I think it should be a right. But that being said, we don't exactly live in like a perfect utopian society. So how can we really support everyone? I don't exactly know. Um, but I think also like it helps to acknowledge that certain peers or patients, like whatever the language is for who you work with, like if they are feeling unmotivated or unsupported, like that's not necessarily always untrue. Like that's not always necessarily something that is false. If someone doesn't have enough money for a car, that is a huge problem. You know what I mean? So I think it's helpful to like not downplay those types of struggles. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Um, I said I was going to
You
watch the
have
time.
3 minutes left.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of what I wish family members or loved ones understood about recovery capital and recovery supports, I think the biggest thing is that recovery is not the only part of my identity. I am a full being outside of just recovery. Granted, a lot of things that don't seem to be related to recovery are. But I think it's really meaningful if someone like asks how I'm doing and like doesn't isn't trying to like disguise that question as like how's your recovery, right? Like how's school, how's your job, and really meaning those questions, because we are full people and a lot of our experiences may not directly relate to like substance use, but they do relate to our wellness. And in terms of how has recovery capital, family, and community support played a role in my recovery journey, a community is such an important part of my recovery. Um, and I think for a long time I kind of resisted that. I was like, no, I can do this alone. And I could, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. So I think it's really been helpful to connect with other people in recovery. I mean, that's one reason why I really love my job because I get to meet other people around my age in recovery, which is cool. But also just being related, being connected to something bigger than yourself. So that could be community, or that could be kind of like a sense of purpose and fulfillment and meaning has been really important for my recovery and for a lot of other people's recovery as well as I've seen. So, yeah. In terms of anything I'd like to know more about, I'm always looking to learn about more resources, more recovery pathways, especially those that people see as like weird or unconventional. Like, yes, please, I want to know about it. And I think that recovery capital for young adults is very specific, hence why we're here talking about that topic. So I'm always interested in learning about the data and research on any resources available. But I think that is where I will stop because I don't want to keep talking. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jolie. That was super informative and amazing. Yes, all the claps in the world. Fantastic. I really like too that you brought up COVID because I think emerging adults in the current era all had experiences with COVID in, high school-ish. And that too is going to have a huge impact in the resources that they have and the way that they're seeing the world. So I really appreciate you brought that up. And I love that you brought up that there's other recovery options, right? We all love 12 step. We know it helps so many people, and that is not the only thing that exists. So I think the more we can learn about those other resources and options, the better for everybody. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, next we have Eleanor Bird. So she is also a peer recovery support specialist, and she is a part of the JEAP board member. So she is on the emerging adult board for JEAP. We're so excited to hear her story next.
Thank you. So as Lauren said, I'm Eleanor Bird. I'm 24. I entered recovery when I was 18. I am a certified peer specialist, and as the other certification has changed, I guess it's called public safety specialist now. It used to be a different certification name. And I'm the service coordinator for Mercy Step 1 service, which provides acute withdrawal management in just hospitals around town. And we do direct admissions for alcohol and opioid withdrawal. So to explain a bit about my story and my background, I grew up in a privileged area. My dad was a state rep, and he passed away when I was 3. Obviously, at that age, I didn't know my mom had mental health challenges. I just knew that things weren't right. So I struggled to find independence or to explore away from my mom or not be an extension. And so going through life around 7 is when I first started drinking with my mom. And it was something that bonded us, like a secret that was kept from the family. And so my mom dated random guys. I did deal with different forms of abuse, but one of them would pay me to find her hidden bottles of alcohol around the house and take them. And so these little things where I just had access to alcohol. I started using opioids and other substances when I was 12. That was also when I started to get arrested and going through that whole cycle. I didn't receive a whole ton of interventions. I was put in therapy quite a few times, but when I opened up to a therapist, my mom would pull me out of therapy. I would have police come to my school, show me pictures of what the like beautiful young girls and then what they looked like after drugs and tell me that that's why you don't do drugs. You're going to be ugly and no one will want to marry you. So these interventions that I received were not effective for me. So throughout high school is when I started going into inpatient behavioral health wards. And that would be from suicide attempts. That would be from one time I dug myself in a ditch, waiting to die, trying to play a trick on God. So I had lots of mental health challenges that weren't properly getting addressed. The resources in my area believed they were making attempts at addressing my disorders, but really I didn't get any relief. I felt more abnormal from those interventions because I didn't see other people in my neighborhood or in my town having those interventions, just me. So, in recovery, we feel that we're more maladapted to life and we're trying to find tools to resolve that. When just about after I turned 18, or no, before I turned 18, I was 17, I went into the hospital. And I didn't live with my mom a lot. I lived with all sorts of different people, but I had to live with my mom after that, and I was on house arrest. So I had to go to an intensive outpatient program, and they told me I could, because they knew I really didn't want to be there. They were drug testing me and saying that I was still popping for new substances. And so they told me I could complete this program if I went to one AA meeting. And so I chose a young person's AA meeting. I am blessed in my area. We have access to 12-step programs. Almost every hour, there's a meeting somewhere around town. But yeah, there's 4 young people's meetings in town for each given week. And pretty much everyone in the 12-step community around here knows each other. So not too anonymous, which is okay for a lot of us as we form that community. It's been important. So I went to that one meeting and I didn't get it then. It took a few more months, and when I got DUI, assault, leaving the scene of an accident, and woke up in jail, and I was like, nah, I think I've had enough of this. These people in 12-step programs are talking a lot about these same feelings and problems that I've been struggling with. They seem like they have it, so let me try this out more. So then I started to try to find community in 12-step programs. I grew up feeling, and I think it's common, feeling different or special, like we can't connect. There's some barrier between me and the rest of the world. And so going to 12-step programs and having that as my outlet for community and as an example of what recovery could look like, I I didn't so much I didn't see anyone my age, or at least if I saw them once, I didn't see them come back. People were in the groups were older. They didn't want to invite me to things because I was very young. Um, Eventually, as they got to know me, I started to get invited more. I had lots of different sponsors, and they would drop me. I was a lot. I entered recovery from substance use disorder. I was working on the mental health component, paying for my own psychiatry because I didn't have a parent that could financially support me and support me getting treatment. And so I went to school. COVID happened when in my senior year. So I was 18. It was after I got sober, a little bit after I got sober. And when COVID happened, I started going out to meetings farther away. There's the area, St. Charles, O'Fallon. They kept 12-step meetings going. And so that was pretty much like the bread and butter of my life was 12-step meetings. And I would had this willingness, this intrinsic willingness to do whatever it took to have a better life because I knew that there's got to be some solution out there. I was still miserable for maybe like 2 years after entering recovery. But with COVID and high school. Oh yeah, so when I got sober, I didn't have my driver's license was revoked. So to get to 12-step meetings, I would go to one meeting, I'd find a ride to one, and then I would ask someone at that meeting to drive me to the next one. And that's how my days would go. I started working when I was 15, and I continued that of once I was 17, I didn't ever want to have less than one job. So I maintained multiple jobs at a time. I went to college for about a year and a half. I had a passion for psychology. So these passion of identifying a purpose and a mission statement, those are things that were the foundation of my recovery, finding that identity. And through college, I really thought that it would give me more understanding of my identity, but I still felt a bit different. Like I couldn't connect. I wasn't going out drinking with everyone. And I started a collegiate recovery club at my school, which didn't really get a lot of attendance. We partnered with another local school that had a larger club and would do our meetings together. But I really was just trying to make any outlet to connect with people. I wasn't in a good living situation when I was in school, and I was living with my mom and someone she married, and I knew that I needed to move. And so I left school and I started working overnights at a residential facility. And so I had lots of access to different jobs. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. I had lots of access to different jobs and just that financial security and being able to, it was difficult to continue paying for therapy every week and psychiatry every 4 to 6 weeks, but I knew I needed to stay alive. And so left school. Yeah, so I started working at a residential facility overnights, and I heard about this peer certification. And when I went through classes for my peer support certification, my recovery changed. That's when I learned there were other pathways to recovery. That's when I learned that it's not so black and white of your recovery looks good or your recovery doesn't look good. There are people living in all sorts of different ways that are in recovery. I wasn't exposed to that. I just went to random 12-step meetings that had the tools that they had, and I didn't know there were more tools out there. And so through those peer classes, I started also make friends with other people that were going down that career path. Um, and so from there, I started my career, peer support, and then moving up through different relationships. And so I had pretty good access to treatment because I supported myself because I had that motivation to support myself. Once I learned the words to describe what was going on with me. I didn't know how to ask for help because I didn't know what was going on. And once I learned what was going on, I was given the words to say, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, and I need help. And there are some guidelines to follow to actually help. That's when I started to get better. Thank you, Lauren. So uh, learning more of those words through 12-step programs, through that community that I had built, because I always felt like I didn't have a family, but I was given that in recovery of meeting people that are in this other way of life. And so I was able to pull from all these different, like this 12-step from SMART, from Celebrate Recovery. I took a little trip down I went Pentecostal for a year. So I've taken quite a few paths in this recovery journey and was doing Celebrate Recovery for a while too. And I still have that black and white of this is good recovery and this is bad recovery. And eventually I learned that that recovery pathway wasn't for me anymore. All these pathways were for me at a certain point because they got me to where I am now and gave me the tools to be able to fill or have a richer recovery capital. But they were just pieces in the timeline. And so all those having the access in my area, being very fortunate, I don't think I would have been able to maintain recovery without that, without knowing that if all these people in this one meeting, I'm not really their favorite, I can go to another meeting. Not everyone has that. And also with job opportunities, it's just a huge thing that I'm so fortunate to have in my area too. So yeah, I think I could stop there. Nowadays, I mean, I will say today, it's very important in my recovery to carry the message and continue to help people. And I just have this lovely job where I get to go out in the community and bridge the gaps between agencies and make sure that we're providing a adequate consult service as well in the hospital too, so that because it's an important piece in that continuum and make sure it's beneficial when people are reaching out for help. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Eleanor. I think the pathways thing is coming up today. Like that's what I'm hearing. It's just the importance of the knowledge of pathways, knowing that there's not just one way to do recovery and that there's not one way to do it for you either, right? Like in one stage of life, AA might work, and another stage of life, Celebrate Recovery is really helpful. Another stage of life, maybe medication is more helpful, right? So it's like there's all these different things, all these different ways that you can get into recovery and maintain recovery. So I appreciate that. I also liked what you said about the internal willingness you had, where it was like it wasn't always easy or going well, but you just had this drive that kept you going. And I think that's a key part of recovery capital. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Um, okay, we have one more presenter before our Q&A. So next we're going to hear from Sandy Valentine. I know I gave her a brief intro before, but she's a family member, so she's going to give us a little bit of a new perspective.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody. I am a person in long-term recovery myself. Initiated my recovery when I was 26, which was a really long time ago. But I always feel like I'm an emerging adult because of when my recovery began. But I'm on the other end of things. I'm also married to a person in long-term recovery. But the reason I'm on the panel today is to really share with you what was helpful when my youngest son began to misuse substances. Our family experience around drugs and alcohol might be a little different than most because our four children were born when both my husband and I had been in recovery for a bit of time. And so they have never seen us use substances. We've never had substances in our house, just naturally, not by any legalism. People knew what we were about and they didn't bring it. So we were trying to set up this example that we had an option for our children to see that people could still have a great time and live a great life without substances. And my husband was also working in the field of recovery, and we were transparent about our own stories. Based on the age of the child, we were very matter of fact about our own recovery stories and how passionate we were about it. Our oldest two children, we have four together, and our oldest two have never used substances. They're now 29 and 31, and honestly, I didn't really believe that until they reached their late 20s when they had no reason not to tell us the truth. But they kind of both looked at the medical condition of addiction and that they had double genetic streams pointing at them, and um, they just felt like it wasn't worth it to them to use substances. But our youngest son, number three out of four, made some different choices. And it kind of all kicked off in my awareness when I received a phone call from the athletic director of his high school when he was a sophomore. So Matthew had been caught vaping in the boys' bathroom. And I went to the school, and dumb me, I go, was it cannabis? Because it never occurred to me that this three-season athlete would risk his lungs just for nicotine. Um, and it wasn't cannabis. So I thought, oh, okay, well, at least this is where we're starting all of this. Obviously, it was not the beginning of his substance use journey, but it had been unfathomable to me that he would risk his spot on the basketball team. He was a top student, a three-season athlete, and actually the only extrovert, I should say, the only extrovert in our family. So he got sent home with me and was suspended for the team for 4 weeks. And that night, we talked it through with his dad. And here's where I really want to pause because what we did next was one of the most important decisions we made and continue to make. Instead of punishing and lecturing, we treated Matthew as a resource. We explored why he had taken the risk, and he told us to fit in with his peers. We asked him to help us understand what was working for him about substances and what he was feeling when he was making those choices to use. And this was a first of many conversations over the next 4 years where we kept that same focus to stay curious, to stay connected, and keep the dialogue open. And you can believe me that this was not the approach my parents would have taken, nor was it what I was seeing in other families around us. This truly was the work that my husband had been doing with equipping people to be recovery coaches, and I had gone through the training, but it truly took everything I had to set aside the instinct to ground him, to remove the car, the phone, the money for sports. And I think those responses are really understandable, and every family needs to choose what boundaries they want to lay down. But I kept coming back to one conviction. If we punished his honesty, we would lose access to him. Oof. Sorry, got me a little choked up. And if we lost access, we would lose any opportunity to influence him. Because I think this is a truth that every family needs to hear, is that the decision to initiate recovery belonged to Matthew alone. And I talked about the vaping, but obviously things advanced where he was using cannabis and he was drinking alcohol. And but that choice for him to change what was happening was his alone. And so our job was to continue to stay connected, to be present enough, to be safe enough that when he got there, we were still in the room, that we hadn't built walls between us. And I say it really easily because I've got 11 minutes to share, but it's the hardest thing that I have ever done. I wanted to lock him up and put him somewhere safe. And he also, we've heard from the fellow speakers, he was the first high school class graduating during COVID, class of 2020. But there's something worth naming about emerging adults specifically. So between 18 and 25, there's this huge developmental push towards independence, forming their identities and connecting with peers, figuring out who they are. And they're not really wired for recovery because their parents want that for them. That fighting tends to really backfire. So we really focused on working with it and trying to help him connect to his own values and who he was becoming. That it was his story, not being compliant with our requests. So Matthew was that first class to graduate during COVID. And, during that senior year of high school, he really impressed upon us that he thought he had ADHD. And I didn't think it made any sense because he was a star student. He was a star athlete. He honored all his commitments. He went to school every day. But we did have him evaluated with a therapist, and that turned out to be the case. And so that was one of the factors why he was using substances, was because they helped him navigate what he was feeling and the way his brain was working. And it started to explain so many things. He goes off to college in Chicago in the second year of college after a real rocky summer where he was using alcohol to a large degree, but also calling for rides when he needed it. Um, I never would have done that. So I'm really proud that he called when he couldn't drive. But he phoned us in mid-September of that second year of college, and he said, I just want you to know I've made a commitment to myself to be sober for 30 days. And at the end of it, I'm going to decide if I want to continue. He called us at the 30-day mark and said, and we celebrated with him. And he said, I think I've decided to continue this to the end of the semester. And so when he came home on break, we celebrated again. This past September, Matthew celebrated 4 years of recovery. And I spoke with him this week before being on this panel to kind of ask him what recovery capital had been most beneficial to him. And these were the things that he said. He said, honestly, he responded in like 30 seconds, which he's way more prepared, I think, than I was. He said he knew his why. Matthew shared that his why was being available to show up for the people in his life that he cared about, and that if he had continued to use substances, he knew that that would be erased. Matthew is a people person. The second thing he said was therapy, that professional support gave him a space that was entirely his own. So even though he could talk to us and he had a great network of friends and community in Chicago, it really gave him a place to be truly vulnerable and transparent. And then the third thing is fitness. So we talked a lot about multiple pathways with our other presenters, and my own pathway in recovery has been a tapestry of many, many different tools. Matthew's found that fitness is really his pathway. It helps him focus the symptoms of ADHD, and just really narrow in on that. And so that's become such a huge part. It's become a vocation, and he's a very successful manager of athletic or personal trainers in Chicago. But he felt like reclaiming his own identity as an athlete and as being fit was part of reclaiming himself. So, when you think about what we had going for us, we had every advantage. I had my own recovery, I had a husband working in the field, and so many resources available to us. But we were still navigating our fear, our anger, our disappointed. Like, how could this happen in our house? Like, we set all the example we could, and we felt all of it. But here's what, again, to reiterate that I learned that we had our own work to do around our feelings, that it wasn't Matthew's job to carry our feelings. If we brought our fear and our grief in every conversation with him, we would have made him staying connected with us feel like a burden. So we both used our recovery tools and practices to navigate all of those emotional responses to his behavior with substances and kept that separate from him. Um, and this is what I mean, when we talk about family recovery as being very real and very necessary, if we don't do our own work, on our anxiety, on our communication, as a parent, particularly a need to control, to keep your child safe, we kind of risk creating an environment that for many emerging adults made substances very appealing in the first place. And I say that not that Matthew's use was our fault as parents. I don't say that at all. But in providing tools and resources and being part of his connection and his network, we needed to make sure we could keep that connection. So the great news is there is so much support for families. Programs are growing all the time. There's always been Al-Anon, and I was a member of Al-Anon for many years. I love Smart Recovery for Friends and Family. I think that's an amazing program. The workbook for that is awesome. There's tons of family therapists that now specialize in this in the work, and it's all part of the recovery capital. By the family members taking care of their own recovery, we can share it with them. So to wrap up, because I think I'm coming close, if I could leave you with three things, it would be to any family member or loved one, just to stay connected. Your relationship is your leverage, and so you want to make sure you don't trade it, just to try to avoid consequences, to treat the loved one as a resource and asking more questions than giving answers, and then to make sure that you're doing your own work. The emerging adult that you love doesn't need to be concerned about you or how you're navigating it. Um, and Matthew's recovery is his, but our whole family has been blessed by everything that he has done because, he also invested in learning how to coach others in recovery, and he uses those tools in his everyday life. And as a side note, he married a young woman that is becoming a therapist. So he brought therapy into his own house. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about Matthew and our story.
Yeah, Sam, that was such a powerful story. Thank you so much. I think what I saw is the fact that you all, like uh your way of being, you modeled to stay curious and show up. And then his why for being in recovery is to be able to show up. Like I think that just shows how much of a powerful force you all were in just staying curious and open and showing up for him. So that was really powerful for me. Um, okay,
If I could
so
add one thing,
yeah,
I do have three podcasts I'm going to post in the chat. One is Matthew's story at 3 months. So, what was he doing a podcast about recovery at 3 months? But some of you might find it interesting. And the other is when I was leading collegiate recovery at UConn, I had a student do a podcast with me and my husband, or I think it was just me actually, and then his parents, and they did not hear each other. So it's really interesting to hear what the parents were doing in the other. So I'll post those links. And I'm, again, whether it's about being a family member or collegiate recovery or any of that, I'm happy to support anybody who might be navigating what we did.
okay, so First off, I obviously want to thank our panelists one more time for sharing their experiences and being open to this and being so vulnerable. I think all of them were just incredible. Yes, all the claps. And then I also want to say that now we have time for questions. So we have about 20 to 25 minutes for question and answers. So if you all want to unmute, you can, or if you would rather use the chat, I can also kind of keep an eye on that. But we are all happy to answer questions. Yeah, and I want to echo Kristen. So the podcast that Sandy shared is called Recovery Matters, and the entire series is amazing. And they post on like their Instagram all the time, and it's just the stories that you can hear there are really great. So, okay, so the first question in the chat says, have people found they are stigmatized for utilizing a social model that honors autonomy with their children? Sandy, do you have any thoughts on that one? Because I see you
Yes.
shaking your head. Okay.
So I was at the time Matthew was going through this. One of my pathways was being a part of a church community. Not currently, but so we received a lot of judgment for not taking a punitive approach. And don't get me wrong, we laid down boundaries. Like if you drink and drive, you will lose the car in that instant. If you ask your sister who is in high school with them to cover your lies and you spread your dishonesty to her, there will be a boundary. But we didn't do the type of punishing um, you know, that a lot of the families around us would have put into place. But we've also always had the belief that we were raising adults and not children. And so we had this opportunity while he was in our home to be there to guide and influence, and not create conditions where he would put himself in more unsafe places. Just one thing while I'm chatting again. For all the researchers here, we heard in all these stories the impact of the pandemic. And I really look at older research prior to the pandemic as not being as valuable, certainly valuable, but not as valuable, because I feel like the generations that experienced it as young people, it has changed so much. And so if you have a chance to do research in this area, I'd be really excited to read it someday.
Ashley, do you have a question?
Yeah, first, just thank each of you for sharing your expertise with with us and helping to inspire ideas. I mean, each of you had described such a different set of recovery capital factors. And so it seems pretty clear. Maybe there is a factor out there and we just haven't, it seems pretty clear that there's not like one factor that is like fundamental, that that helping young adults achieve recovery and sustain recovery is a combination of factors that's going to look different every single time. But I'm wondering, like, do you have thoughts about like how the different recovery capital pieces came together? Like, is it, you need this and this, or do you have are there any sort of ideas? And you don't have to have, but are there any ideas that strike you about how does the combination come together to create the magic? Because right, we want to take that magic and research it and create, like, be able to replicate it. So, do you have thoughts about like how that combination comes together?
Jolie?
I Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm gonna share one that's like the most clear because I think something I'm speaking for myself and also I'm speaking in my role as a peer recovery specialist for young people. Um, Something that is a struggle for a lot of people, including myself, is socializing, like doing social things. I hear a lot of people around my age have social anxiety. Could be because of the COVID lockdown, like that got worse, or I'm not exactly sure the reasons, but I think I think that kind of connects to like social events and like fun events because like I'm hearing people are really struggling with social anxiety and loneliness too, by the way. Loneliness is this huge thing. But then a lot of them there's not a ton of events out there for young people in recovery. But then even the ones that are out there, they have trouble getting to go, either because of like transportation or because they may even have a car or a way to get there, but then they're like, no, I'm nervous, like I feel awkward, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. So I think something that we've, at least at my job, and even just with myself, I've really tried to focus in on is like really low stakes social activities or kind of like drop-in events and thinking about how things really appeal to young people. Even, like social media is a huge thing, connecting with people on social, we're on TikTok because like we have to be, right? But like that's also a way that people can see us and get to know us. So I do feel like I'm not exactly sure which two recovery capitals kind of converge there. I guess community and social, but I think for kind of getting young people involved in any social event, um, there really has to be this specific planning and these specific ways that we do that now because otherwise they just won't come. And honestly, even sometimes that recovery title makes people not even want to come even more, right? So like instead we just have like a substance-free event, but we don't say recovery oriented or sober or anything. It does draw a different crowd, so it's something to think about too. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I think, and it also echoes a lot of what Eleanor described about like the feeling like like other, like not feeling like the connection, that social connection in some of those settings. And then combine that with the access barriers, like you mentioned transportation. I know Eleanor mentioned that, like some of those access barriers sort of converging that can create the barrier. But if you can overcome some of those, maybe that combination could make a difference.
Yeah, and if I could just add something to that, I think having finding evidence for the belief that I have not yet met all the people I love when I first got sober was what carried me. Meeting random people that might not have I might not have met a second time or I might not have met a third time that I actually enjoy talking to and forming those relationships where we could both openly say, we don't know how to have friendships. We don't know how to do life. And we're figuring it out and having that common understanding between other people in recovery. And then also the belief that if I keep doing the next right thing, the next right things will happen and finding evidence for that. I was just thinking last week, like to myself, I am so glad I didn't kill myself. Like, I love my life now. There are days I really don't love it, but I never feel the way that I did when I really wasn't doing good. Um, and it's finding the evidence because we can find evidence for everything, but finding that evidence and watching people find that evidence and seeing how their life got better. So just exposure.
I want to share an example. I went back to Yukon yesterday to the collegiate recovery program that I had led prior to 3 years ago. And there was a student who had been a first year student who had come in the doors and was one of the most painfully shy people I've ever met in my life. And I'm so grateful that she found us. But for weeks, she wouldn't make she would sit in the social space and sit in meetings and would not share, would not make eye contact. And about 5 months in, she started talking a little bit and talking to me one on one. Now, 5 months, right, of showing up, which is amazing. Um, and I went back yesterday, and she was a student worker in the collegiate recovery program and chatting me up words just tumbling out. And I think we're always looking for that one size fits all answer, like this is the money shot, or I don't even know why I'm using that language. It's not my language, but this, and I think the most important thing for anybody exploring recovery is to keep an open mind and to have that navigator, whether it's a recovery coach or an ally in their life, who's going to be like, hey, this is going to be a scavenger hunt. We're going to try out all these tools and practices until we find something that's working for you today. And when that stops working, know that there's way more. Because even at UConn, we had tons of resources, resource rich, but finding them and finding a way to connect with them was like a needle in a haystack. So I'm so glad that Jolie and Eleanor are out there working in these programs and able to help others navigate, because I was kind of a matriarch to the program, right? I'm like the mom figure, but ultimately it's finding peers that they can connect with that I find is the most positive thing out of all the tools and practices.
I also think all of you are highlighting the fact, which I've said before, but just that the recovery journey is unique for everyone. So, like, Recovery Capital can kind of help us understand all the various resources that will help someone in recovery, but ultimately it's a one-on-one kind of conversation or needs, and then that's going to change as they go. So I feel like clinically this is so important to know. And then as family members, this is so important to know. And as researchers, like I really can see how just understanding the various paths to recovery is going to be so important. There is a question which I can see Sandy is answering, and then I'll get to you, Julia, as well. But do you have any suggestions for increasing student engagement in student recovery services?
Yeah, I
So
would
we have
say,
mock socials.
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
actually.
you're okay. Go, Julie.
Um, this is just a small thing. Use social media. Have your students use social media. Have students make TikToks, have students make silly, funny graphics, memes. It doesn't have to just be like, hey, come to this event, blah, blah, blah. It could be like, when you're in recovery in college, insert a funny picture or something like that. You know what I mean? Just to get people to feel connected. I think that can help get people in really well. And use hashtags.
I would just add one more thing to Bill answer the question they have funded GAs. I found that delivering recovery ally training across campus was a non-threatening way to socialize the program and to create connection. So while folks might not come want to check it out, they'll come check out ally training to be a good ally to their fellow student, their fellow human. And then through that, they would get curious. So that was an incredible tool for me.
Thank you. Julia, you had your hand raised next. Do you have a question?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing wisdom, and that was truly inspiring. So my work is actually focused on older adults, those same questions, except for people who have never had a chance to fully emerge, or they have had a relapse later in life. And so, what I was thinking about is how do you navigate these spaces when you have outlived all your recovery capital, or at least you feel you might have? And, resources are very, very depleted. Your family members have died, or pushed you away, or a little bit of both. And they may be very little in the community where you currently are. You might be in assisted living, and so not much going on there for you. Like, is there still hope to kind of like in some ways find that if there is a wish, if there is a will, there is a way when things are looking gloomy? And I think that's sort of like another kind of like take on that is, do you see in your work any kind of multi-generational efforts where people can, translate wisdom across, 50 or 60 years span, where they can find themselves in similar situations somewhat and can learn from one another in those unusual types of, peer relationships or sponsor relationships where it's actually the younger person helping the older one rather than the other way around.
Mhm. I have some thoughts, but I would like to see if the panelists have any ideas. Eleanor, did you have something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have worked with many patients that are over the age of 60. And of course, there's always that initial, like, what are we doing here? And then opening up about my lived experience and emotions that come up with that lived experience, always creates that bond. And so what I found to be helpful, especially for individuals that are older that might not feel like the traditional recovery spaces are very accepting of them because of their age. As those group activities, maybe it's a book club or something. Having that list of these are activities that you will be able to meet people at that aren't drinking or using while you're there, that have shared hobbies. Really, really tuning into these strengths and skills and hobbies. But I mean, I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
Sandy, did you have a thought too before we go?
Yeah, so what state are you in? Just curious.
I'm in Connecticut, but a lot of my work
Oh,
is global health. So it's not just the US, it's a global
okay,
problem.
got you. So across, the United States, there are recovery community centers in many, many states. Connecticut has 8 of them. And they're also in Connecticut, they dispatch recovery coaches to every hospital in the state where they are often connecting with elders. But here in Rhode Island, there's actually some dedicated effort into looking at how to reach seniors, especially in nursing facilities. And there's an attempt, and it's an early attempt, but there's an attempt to start to bring recovery coaches into nursing homes. And a lot of it is the folks in the nursing homes and assisted living typically are experiencing the other diseases and impacts of a life of substance misuse. So whether it's liver disease or heart disease related to their use. And so equipping these coaches to go in that are kind of looking at it from a broader perspective in terms of the types of medical care that they need. But I also put in a couple links. So intherooms.org or .com, it's the same organization, has a wide array of virtual meetings available for anybody, anywhere, any hour of the day.
Yeah, there's a few resources in the chat that are important, but I also want to try and get to the other questions. So hopefully that helped, Juliet. Or here if you have more thoughts on it too. Okay, so the next hand I saw was Nita. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you to all the panelists. That was very inspiring to hear your stories. I know it was briefly talked about, but you mentioned like I think Jolie mentioned like stigma around like help seeking and just stigma around like substance use. So I'm just curious to hear like what are some ways that maybe we can reduce the stigma around these conditions, especially for like emerging adults, just to increase like either engagement in services or just like increase like help seeking. Yeah.
I think one way, now this is difficult, but something that I have found probably to be one of the most helpful things engaging with peers, and also when I think back to my own struggles is just to have to know a peer, like to know someone just like me. So this is hard, right? And especially depending on where you're located, like there may, like, I don't know if there are young people who are recovery coaches or peer support specialists. But like, luckily for like where I live, we have like the organization I work for, right? So sometimes, what it takes is for me to like today I'm at a community center, right? Like I come in for a few weeks, I just mingle, I say, hi, I'm Jolie, like this is what I do. And then I slowly start sharing my story. And that can get someone, I'm sorry, it's kind of loud out there if you can hear that. That can get someone like hooked in and more like, oh, like it gives them this little glimmer of hope that like, oh, someone is like me. Um, so there's that. Um, I don't want to take up too much time, but I can put some more stuff in the chat. Finding people around their age also in recovery if possible.
Yeah. And I think so often we focus on the substance use instead of the big underlying behaviors or behaviors that are adjacent. Um, and I think from a younger age, gaining a better understanding of those symptoms and behaviors around the substance use, the ones that make someone without a substance use disorder look at that and be like, what is wrong with this person? Why would they do that? It makes no sense. Those things of explaining that it's not going to make sense. And that's the unfortunate reality of it. And I think unveiling that can help with reducing the stigma because it gives a better understanding from somewhat a bystander.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, so Kevin, I want to get to your question.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for putting this together. I'm a psychologist and a researcher in this area. And as I was listening to the panelists, I was struck that each of their stories, like people entered addiction and entered recovery with with a different profile of baseline recovery capital or baseline resources in these different domains. And I know that folks here are developing a measure for emerging adults, and there's some other measures out there. And I was curious what both researchers and the panelists thought about using a recovery capital assessment um, in maybe a treatment setting to identify areas of like strength and weakness or like high recovery capital and low recovery capital as like a treatment target to identify areas to grow in.
Yeah, I think like as a clinician and researcher, I think it can be a really great tool of exactly what you're saying. Like, what are the areas that you already have some recovery capital that we can continue to build? And then what are some areas where it's lower and we can work on building those too? So just kind of being thoughtful about how to use that. But I think clinically it can be a really great tool. Jolie, you have your hand up too.
I think also, I think that's a great idea. I I know it also can get blurry with like the roles as like you're a psychologist, but like there might be like a caseworker or like someone else, right? But I think that like however you can build recovery capital is a lot of the time, honestly, what people in treatment or in getting recovery services also really value and want. Like a lot of people I interact with are like, I don't know how to do this thing, but I'm getting all these groups, I'm getting all this stuff, no shade to groups, but it can get very exhausting to be in groups or like thinking about these mental health topics, addiction topics without like applying for food stamps. You know what I mean? Because it's like it's in your mind and you're like, I have to do this thing, but I don't have the resources and time to do it. So if there's any way to dedicate some more time to those kinds of skills and resources, I think it would be amazing.
And I think it would be amazing to thread that into treatment planning, especially in an outpatient setting. In an inpatient setting, I know most facilities, especially if they take commercial or marketplace insurance, they have their own assessments developed to measure the responsiveness and how their life will be more fulfilled or has become more fulfilled throughout the duration of their treatment. And in outpatient settings, I don't see that so much of the own individual assessment that might look something like a recovery capital assessment in my work. Those are questions that come up naturally that we don't document or track. And in a hospital setting, we're not talking about what's your best friend's name? We're really getting into like, what are you running at discharge? What will you be running a deficit with? That's the right way to say it. And how can we help you fill those buckets up, looking more at the dimensions of wellness.
Similar idea. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Again, just being thoughtful of time. We have to wrap up. I know we all could probably talk about it all day, but I just want to thank everybody for their time. Obviously, the panelists were incredible. I also want to thank everybody who asked those questions. They were very thoughtful and really gave us some more depth. And just to wrap up, we're going to have Dr. Zajac do a few announcements. And as a reminder, we will send out an email that has the recording and some links and information for people. So if you have any follow-up questions, that'll be a good place to look. But thank you for coming.
Oh, hi everybody. I'm Kristen Zajac and I'm the PI on CHEARR. And so I just had a couple of quick announcements. I put them in the chat earlier, but I'll put them again now. But first, I just want to say thank you to Jolie, Eleanor, and Sandy for sharing everything with us today. And also that they're like such an integral part of CHEARR and JEAP outside of the forum as well. And so thank you for all of the things you've done for these projects. And Lauren, too, thank you so much for facilitating. You did an awesome job. So given that we have 2 minutes, I'm just going to put these quickly in the chat. There's 3 things here. One is we have a special issue coming up in the journal Emerging Adulthood. So if there's any researchers who have work that they're doing in this area of emerging adults and recovery, consider submitting. We just extended the deadline to June 1st. So if you had something that you didn't quite have ready and now you have a little bit more time, maybe you can get it in. Second is the CHEARR Showcase. It's a national platform for discussing recovery science. There's presentations and conversations held every second Wednesday of every month. You could email Patrick Hibbert to get on that invite list. And finally, we have a newer thing, which is an emerging adult special interest group for people interested in research discussions related to emerging adults. It's co-hosted by JEAP and CHEARR, and then we meet every other month on the first Thursday from 1 to 2. You can email our CHEARR email address if you want to get added to that. And I will stop there with 1 minute to spare. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for coming, everybody. There are some emails in the chat if you want to follow up. And like I said, again, we'll send them all out too. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.